Well, hello, everybody. I'm David Madison. I'm the Executive Director of the Southwestern Association of Episcopal Schools, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon, Planning for Fall Reopening. So it's great to see everybody. A couple of items of housekeeping before we get started. First, a recording of this webinar will be available in the webinar library. It takes about a day or two for us to migrate it over to the webinar library, but it will be available if you'd like to watch a recording of this or go back and share a recording with others. You certainly can do that. Also, slides will be made available in the document library. Both of those areas on the website are password protected, so you'll need your login credentials. If you need to recover your login credentials, if you contact Pat Blevins at the office, she will certainly be able to help you with that. The Q&A box, if you'll look at the bottom of your screen, there should be a button that's marked Q&A. That's going to be the best way to interact with us during the webinar today. If you have questions, make sure to enter those. Points of clarification, anything you'd like to share with the panelists, please use the Q&A box. And then at various points throughout the presentation, we'll stop and make sure that all of your questions are answered. So before I turn it over to Mary Catherine, I'd like to make a few comments about the resources that you have available. Don't forget the SAES resources that are available to you as we're all working through these questions of what's fall going to look like. A couple things I'd like to highlight. First, the resource page on our website has a whole variety of documents that you should be familiar with. I promise that your parents are familiar with those, as are your faculty members. So make sure you're up to date on the most recent guidelines from CDC, from the state licensing agency, if you're a licensed facility, and then your state education agency as well. For example, in Texas, the TEA just released their guidelines last night on what the fall reopening will look like. So while those regulations aren't necessarily binding on private schools, since you're an accredited organization as opposed to an organization that's regulated by TEA, those documents and the guidelines contained therein do need to be part of your conversation. Why? Because although TEA isn't going to enforce those provisions upon you, the reality is that that document creates a standard of care. So if your guidelines, if your processes, and if your protocol deviates dramatically from that standard of care, there's a question of whether or not you've exposed the school to some legal liability. So again, while you don't have to follow the letter of those regulations, if you deviate from those dramatically, there can be some problems. So even though you're not a public school, and you're accredited by SAES or another private school accrediting agency, those guidelines are still relevant to your conversation, and make sure that you're familiar with those. A couple webinars I'd like to bring to your attention. We hosted a webinar, I believe it was last week, with our friends from Fisher and Phillips that explored the legal considerations of returning to campus. There are all sorts of legal issues that, that these kinds of questions generate. And a lot of the things with regard to campus safety, HR, there's tons of HR issues with regard to paid leave, how we're communicating and what we're communicating. All of those questions have legal ramifications. And in that webinar, the team at Fisher Phillips did a great job at reviewing those questions and giving some guidance on that. So make sure, if you haven't listened to that webinar, go back and listen to that webinar, because a lot of your questions are going to have legal ramifications that need to be vetted by the school's attorney. Also, from that webinar, Fisher Phillips generated a checklist for us to take a look at our policy handbooks and ask, what are the different policies that we need to possibly update as a result of COVID? So that document, that checklist, is in the document library. So make sure to take advantage of that if you haven't already. I also want to remind you of a webinar that we did. It feels like it was years ago. It wasn't that long ago, but right when this whole situation started unfolding, Rob Evans and Michael Thompson joined us and just talked about leading in a time of crisis and what that looks like. There are some specific and unique leadership challenges that are facing all of our school leaders right now, and they did a great job at framing those challenges and giving strategies for how to respond to those challenges. So if you attended that webinar live, go back and take a look at it. If you weren't able to join us, please take a look at the recording in the webinar library, because it's a great session. finally, if you are not plugged into our head of school discussion board, I would encourage you to do so. That's also behind the password, so you'll need your login credentials. But on that discussion board, lots of our heads of school are talking about how are we going to navigate some of these specific issues in detail. And so it's a great format for you to be able to visit with your colleagues, share ideas, come up with creative solutions together. And so if you're not plugged into that discussion board, please do so. And those are my housekeeping items. So I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Professional Development to introduce our speakers, and that's Mary Catherine Duffy. Mary Catherine.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to see so many people joining this webinar. It's going to be a great one. And I'm hoping that you'll come out of it with a framework of ideas and thoughts. These two people, I think, are going to really offer a lot to us today. Catherine Bohott is our first speaker. She is the head of school at Calvary Episcopal in Bastrop. She's starting her 3rd year. And we also have Amy Whitley, who is the assistant head of school at St. Francis Episcopal in Houston, starting her 4th year there. But prior to that, she was 20 years at St. Luke's in Baton Rouge. And both of these speakers have spent a lot of time and energy planning and thinking. And I just know that they're going to offer a lot to us. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Catherine, and she's going to share her screen with us. I do want to remind you guys that we are going to, not only are we recording, but we are going to be sharing the documents with you at the end of this webinar. It may take us a day or so to get it into the documents library, but the stuff that you see on the screen will be shared with you. So Catherine, take it away.
Okay. Hello, everybody. As Mary Catherine said, I am Catherine Bohott, and I am in my 3rd year for starting it at Calvary. I come from the public school world prior to this, and so when I get to the part about CARES funding and navigating that process, we'll, I guess, call on that knowledge a little bit. But so when I started really thinking about what next year is going to look like back in May, like many of you, like the wheels started turning, and one day we thought we had it all figured out, and then something changed. And then another day we thought we had it figured out, and something changed. And then 2 weeks ago, I thought I had it figured out, and then Texas basically went into crisis mode. So this is an update on where we are based on the information that we have with some people that we're working with. And obviously it's all very fluid at this point, but here's essentially the status. So the first thing I want to talk about is our back to school in-service and events. So typically that first week prior to coming back to school, it's this amazing time that we kick off with a chapel service, and my entire staff we have Eucharist, we work together, we have meetings, we have group lunches. Our church is currently closed. We are in the Episcopal Diocese of Texas, and the rules down here are still pretty stringent. So the congregation is not meeting at all. The sanctuary is closed. The parish hall is closed. And we are a tiny school that relies very heavily on these shared spaces. So not only is the closure of these spaces affecting our in-service, it is affecting how we start school and host any events in the fall semester. So our welcome back service, I am still working with our rector on what that's going to look like. It may simply not happen. I would hate for that to be the case, but we just don't know. There's still a pin in that. We may be able to do something via Zoom and have a walk around communion. That is one option. My whole staff meetings will be via Zoom. We are not going to gather the whole staff of 31, again, we're a tiny school, in one meeting space together. That is because of A, we don't have the parish hall to be able to do that, and that's where we normally do it. And B, just to be able to adhere to the social distancing guidelines that we will hold the staff to when they are leading their classes, we also have to do that when we're leading our staff meetings. I will meet with the teachers in their classrooms. We can have socially distanced, masked meetings for those individual things. The other thing we're doing is my assistant and I are pre-prepping the teachers' classrooms. So, and believe it or not, because we all know how teachers can be, that this was very well received, going in and placing the desks as to how they could look socially distanced, because so many teachers and I was one of these people, we have bookshelves surrounding the rooms. Our walls are stacked with stuff. And if you sat in on the Rosner model webinar, they went into, hey, you guys, we got to put kids against walls. We have to use our space effectively. So my assistant and I are going in and setting up each individual classroom with the desks spread out so the teachers can go in during that in-service week and figure out where they're going to move all of their stuff around where we're placing kids. And the last thing for in-service is we are giving them more time in their classrooms. Typically they had day and a half, 2 days to go into their classroom to get everything finalized, their plans, their setups. They are likely going to get probably 3 solid days to do that, just because, you know, teaching in life as we know it is going to look completely different. Our events, Meet the Teacher. I went back and forth on how to do this. Initially, I thought that I would bring the different classes in at different assigned times. So we would have a grade level assigned to a specific time. And then based on our reentry plan, we will not be allowing any visitors on campus, at least for the first several weeks, probably the first semester. And by visitors, I mean parents. So the only people allowed on campus initially will be students and staff. So that pretty much squashed having any sort of face-to-face Meet the Teacher. So what we will do is I will coordinate Zooms for individual grade levels. Parents will be expected to attend and the teachers will host that with me. I'm looking at this positively because it will give me a focused time to talk to the families about annual fund and about our different ways that they can help, and they're not sitting in the sanctuary wrangling their pre-K 3 student, trying to get them still until I finish talking. So I'm calling this a positive as it can be. Fall events. So we are small. We do have a Dads and Donuts. We have Grand Friends Day, which is, you know, bring a grandparent or whomever onto campus. Those are postponed until further notice. We don't want to just completely do away with them. I have some teachers putting together ideas to doing video tours for Dads and Donuts and making individual gifts for the dads. But again, we don't really know what the timeline is going to look like. So if I get into November and it looks like we're still not going to be able to have a Dads and Donuts in, let's say, January, February, we'll transition to a more virtual or video type situation. Same goes for field trips. We bring a lot of field trips onto campus. We bring experiences. We have a guy who brings birds of prey. We have a zoo that comes. We have the local fire department comes, all those different things. Those are postponed until second semester. And then we have canceled our fall book fair, primarily because that did take place in our parish hall, and through Scholastic, we can focus more heavily on the online orders that go directly, they benefit the classrooms directly instead of going to the general Scholastic Dollars account. And then finally, our Christmas program. As you guys saw, the message board was blowing up yesterday talking about how are we going to do music class. Well, you know, Christmas programs, we have 2 programs, the Nativity with the younger kids and a full night of chorals and lessons with our older kids. And they start practicing for that in early November. And the reality of us being able to get everybody gathered in that large group to practice every day, in addition to gathering over 200 parents to come see those events, parents, grandparents, families, is just not feasible at this point. So until further notice, it is canceled. I did come up with an idea yesterday of having each grade level learn a song and possibly splicing a video together, but that is still in the works. So risk mitigation. We are working with a group called the Healthcare Alliance Collaborative, and they are a group out of Houston that primarily works with hospitals up until COVID hit. So this group has over 20 years experience specific to infection prevention within medical buildings and hospital systems. And so we are very, very fortunate to be able to work with this group because they take a completely evidence-based approach. So if I get an email from some random company trying to sell me a thing you put in your HVAC system that uses polar ionization to filter the air, I send that to them and say, is this even worth me looking at as an option for sanitation? And they will pull the data and they will confer with each other and then point me in a direction where they think that I should go with that. So we are working on the premise that we are using basic infection prevention principles in our planning to open for the fall. And I will have these links at the end on a resource page as well, but this is their general website if you care to read about them at all. And then down here is a podcast that they did last week. And I sent it out to my parents because the podcast specifically addressed masking, and it addressed just some general infection prevention things that, none of us went to principal school to become doctors. And understanding how this virus works, how, viral spread, viral threat, all of that, I'm leaning on medical professionals to help me guide that. So infection prevention, and you'll see in this presentation, the white slides are the slides that come directly from the Healthcare Advisory Collaborative. Those they sent to me to share with you guys. And you'll see where I have it typed out, that is what we're doing to attempt to do what they're asking us to do over on their side. So just some quick bullets. Again, nobody's allowed on campus unless you are student or staff. So we have a doorbell. We're changing the codes on the door that parents would use to get in. I will say from a personal standpoint, I have a 3-year-old. He is in daycare right now. I hated it at first, and I just got used to it because it's like wearing a mask to go grocery shopping. It's just something that we're doing right now. Daily staff temperature screenings. So that came out in the TEA guidance. And then daily student temperature screenings prior to entering campus. So I will be stationing a person with a thermometer at each station in our car rider line. So students will have their temporal temperature taken prior to exiting the car or as they're exiting the car. In addition, for our parents that walk up to the buildings, I have 2 entrances. I will have a person stationed at each entrance with a temporal thermometer. Now, on that note, I've been cautioned, we are not recording any data on students because we don't have a school nurse. Therefore, we are not legally able to hold medical records on students. So this is simply a screening. There is nothing being recorded in an app, on paper, anything to that nature. Individual student supplies and manipulatives. So, typically we have the group shared in the middle of the table. Students pull their pencils, crayons, whatever. We will be packaging individual boxes for each student, and there will be no crossover. Same thing goes, especially with our younger grades, for manipulatives. We will be converting our restroom fixtures to no touch. So I'm in the process of getting pricing on that right now. Initially, I thought I was going to be really smart and use CARES funds to be able to purchase that. And unfortunately, that got nixed by TEA. So because it's considered a construction expense and we have to stick to primarily consumables. Enhanced sanitation protocols with EPA approved cleaners. We have always purchased a specific hospital grade cleaner for cleaning our campus. Well, then we found out it's not on the EPA list. So in order to be able to protect ourselves in the event of litigation, we have to have something specific from that list. So we will be switching vendors and buying different cleaners. Plexiglass dividers to go in between sinks. In our pre-K classrooms, we have the trough style sinks. So the HAC has advised me to install plexiglass dividers. So density and social distancing, and this is the hot button question. I will be attending that webinar tomorrow with our early childhood students on, the best way to keep them away from each other. What we are doing is we're looking at drop off and pickup staggering. I know, the biggest question I always come up with when I meet with Dr. Monroe and the nurses is, well, we have siblings. So how do we stagger a drop off if we have one student in 4th grade and one student in 2nd grade, and how do you work that out? So that's just a logistical component we're having to work with. We have eliminated our early care. And so early care was from 7:30 to 7:45, where students would all congregate in one classroom if their parents had to drop off early. And based on our cohorting, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, we cannot have a mixing of students. So if you have not watched the Rosner model webinar, it does provide some insight on how many desks you can get in a classroom and how you can space your kids out. And I have that link on the resource page as well. It is kind of mind-boggling, but if you're a math nerd like me, it becomes a really fun puzzle. Capping pre-K classes at 10. So typically I have 14 students and 2 teachers with my 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. I am capping those at 10 for the time being, just to be able to appropriately social distance within those classrooms. And I understand it is going to be a financial burden for us, but I've talked to my board and my finance committee, and that's just one of the decisions that we made going into this. Kindergarten and 6th grade will move to individual student desks. So right now, some of our grade levels use shared tables, and not just in our early childhood classrooms. I was able to purchase more student desks. They, believe it or not, are like crazy for sale on some used websites, and you can find them in really good shape. So we'll be transitioning those grade levels over to that. I'm still on the fence about pre-K. I'm working with the HAC on that as well, just because the developmental appropriateness of it. Assigning centers for our pre-K and kinder students to reduce crossover. So assigning centers for a day, and that way we can sanitize the different items that are in the centers at the end of the day. And I know it's going to be frustrating taking away free choice, but unfortunately that's just our reality right now. And resuming chapel until further notice. So we have chapel 4 days a week. Typically we have our pre-K through first grade students in one chapel service, and then we have our second through sixth graders in more of a formal chapel service where we're reading from the prayer book. Right now we are condensing that into one Zoom chapel service each morning, Monday through Thursday. Cohorting. So cohorting is one of the biggest things that the Healthcare Advisory Collaborative has pushed out for us to consider. And it's really keeping kids away from other kids. So by reducing crossover, you reduce your infection spread as much as possible. And I had to play the devil's advocate the first day I met with these people and said, well, we have siblings, so this doesn't work. And they said, yes, we understand that you have siblings. So you may have a student in kindergarten who has a sibling in second grade, but that doesn't mean you throw cohorting out altogether. By keeping kids within their groups of kids, it makes things incredibly simpler or more simpler for you if you have a exposure or a positive COVID case within a classroom. Because instead of having to shut down the entire school, you're looking at only having to isolate that to a smaller number of students. So I am in a bit of a situation trying to figure out how I'm going to run my after school care program where we collapse all of our students who stay into two groups based on their grade level. I'm still working through those logistics because it's completely cost prohibitive to have, per safeguarding guidelines, 2 students per classroom in all those grade levels. Our specials teachers will be traveling to the classrooms rather than having students travel between them, because disinfecting our specials teacher is a lot easier than disinfecting a complete classroom prior to moving students over. Our 5th and 6th grade are our only grade levels that are semi-departmentalized. So I have one teacher for math and science and one teacher for reading and social studies. So we will continue to have those students move between rooms. That came up, the question of, can we just have the teachers move rather than have the students move? And just, as a teacher, I would hate that. I just told them I don't think it's possible. It's very difficult. And so they said that was okay. We just will have to implement wipe down procedures. So, you know, and again, these are older students, so we can train them 5 minutes prior to switching classes. We wipe down our chairs, we wipe down our desks, we take all of our materials with us from class to class so that we are just keeping things a little bit cleaner. Masking. This is the hot button because I'm sure all you guys have gotten the parent that calls and said, I will not send my child back if they have to wear a mask. And you've also gotten the parent that calls and says, I will not send my child back if everyone is not masked. So based on what TEA put out yesterday and based on what HAC told me as well, students above the age of 10 are at the age where they really start being able to transmit COVID-19 and the coronavirus. So I'm 99% confident in saying that we will have our students in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade mask full time, with the exception of when they are at PE or eating or drinking. It is kind of difficult to consider, but I've gotten some positive feedback from my parents who have their kids in summer classes and camps, stating that they really didn't think that their 2nd and 3rd grade daughters would be able to do it, but they're doing it just fine. So I'm erring on the side of caution with this, just with the masking, because of the potential, you know, liability of not having it. My teachers will wear masks full time. I did purchase the masks with the see-through screens, and I mean, I know it's specifically for teaching phonics in early childhood, but I got them for everybody just because it's really hard when you go places and people can't see your mouth when you're smiling at them. So there's so much through facial expression. So we did order those. We were able to get them for about $3 a piece. They are not that expensive. Chapel lunch and recess. So as I mentioned earlier, we will Zoom our chapel services. The kids are used to it. We Zoomed chapel when we were distance learning, It's why I got this cool headset so they could hear me better. And it's our reality right now. I am hoping to be able to Zoom from the sanctuary so the kids can actually see where we are, and it seems like chapel. The other thing I'm going to consider as things relax a little bit is bringing a grade level in at a time to help me with singing. So if we are in the chapel, having a little bit more of the student buy-in and input, because I do bring a grade level up to sing every day when we sing.
Catherine, real quick question we had
Yes.
about how will people see that in their classrooms? Will they just get on their computers and put that on a screen? Do y'all have TVs? How will that work?
We have projectors.
Okay.
So first grade and up have ceiling mount projectors, and then pre-K kinder, we don't use any tech really in those classrooms. So we just have the projector on a cart that they'll project from their laptops.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. Snacks and lunches. So again, we're tiny. We don't have a cafeteria. Our kids have always had snack and lunch in their classroom. They've always brought their own food. The question did come up, are we going to let children use shared microwaves? I'm on the fence about that, but I do think that it reduces the amount of Lunchables I see on my campus if children bring leftovers. So it will be a matter of having wipe down protocols in place where the teachers and all the way up through third grade, we have a full-time teacher and a full-time assistant in our classroom, so we can utilize that assistant to help with those in between student sanitation practices. Recess will continue as normal. So this actually made me happy when I talked to the healthcare group. UV exposure does a lot for the coronavirus. And so I was asking them, what do I need to be using to spray this playscape down between my cohorts visiting the playground? Because there's there's no way we can keep children inside all day. It's just impossible. And so they said that we are actually okay with our playscape and its exposure to UV. I have not gotten my formal report from them, the write-up. I anticipate seeing a deep clean on the playscape once a week. And so that's something that can be done Friday afternoon. It's in the sun all weekend and we're good. They did say that for our older students who do recess, no crossover of sports equipment or toys. So that's not that hard. Second grade, here's your bag of sports equipment to take to recess. Third grade, here's your bag of sports equipment to take to recess. And so it's a little bit of a management component, but that is very feasible. So using of outdoor spaces is much easier than I thought it was going to be. So that was a good thing. So facilities and ventilation. I did not realize this, but a very large component of infection prevention is ventilation. And when the HAC group, they drove up from Houston and did a 2.5-hour walkthrough of my campus. I went through every single drop-off, pickup. This is where we gather children. This is how they go to the bathroom. This is the flow of traffic, all of that. And my classrooms that don't have windows that open, so I have some older buildings that have the transom windows up high, they are calling for me to mount exhaust fans. And it can be as simple as a restroom exhaust fan. As long as it is pulling the air out of the classroom and venting it to the outside, or increasing that airflow, has a very large impact on viral transmission. And they also said that oscillating fans. So with the installation of an exhaust fan in each of those rooms, as well as you can get the little wall mount oscillating fans at Home Depot for $24 a piece. And those are just going and they're moving air around the whole time. I know it's going to be a little bit loud, and so it'll be an adjustment for the teachers, but it's just the reality of where we are. And then our cleaning procedures by converting the toilets to no touch, all that. I'm still getting pricing on that. It's not going to be a cheap, but it's part of our reality right now. So the learning models, on Monday, Leander ISD, which is a local school district in Central Texas, just outside of Austin, they put out that they were offering the two approaches, which TEA pretty much came out with for everybody yesterday. So I know that up until this week, the public schools were saying, we might have some options. You might be able to do virtual, you might be able to do a flex blended model, you might be able to do on-campus learning. Well, yesterday it was hard and fast rule that is either on campus or it is fully distance learning. And I'm guessing that is because of their PEIMS reporting for attendance tied to funding. And so what that does for us, the question came up is, well, is Calvary going to get rid of the idea of a flex blended model? And right now the answer is no. We likely will not have to utilize it. My largest class is 20 students, and that's in kindergarten, and it's a very large classroom. So the likelihood of me having to go flex blended is slim, but that also having that model and that planning in place is in the event that we do have some sort of directive come down from the state that says, okay, you're capped at 10 kids. You're capped at 10 kids and 2 teachers in a room. My younger students, my kinder and my first grade, if we have to go flex blended, and that means you have 50% of the students on campus at a time, we will do an AM PM split. So we will do a 7:30 to an 11:30, and then we will do probably a 12:30 to 3:30. Initially, I thought we would be able to get it in a little closer, but the time needed to clean the classroom in between groups is going to take a little bit longer than just the 30 minutes. And that would be 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday, and then Friday would be full distance learning for the students so that the teachers can take that time to plan. And then in addition, if they are on campus with us in a flex blended setup, meaning they're with us 50% of the time, and this goes for all grades K through 6, when they are with the teacher, they will have more of a math reading focus. And then when they are distance learning, we will do more project and inquiry-based science and social studies, as well as Zoom specials. So all of my teachers are prepared, even my PE teacher, that they may end up, if we are distance learning or flex blended, they will be Zooming teaching in that model. My 2nd through 6th grade students would use a standard university model or a 2-2-1. So you'd have your Monday, Wednesday cohort, and then your Tuesday, Thursday cohort. So the feedback from parents, it's been about 50-50. Half of them like this idea. Half of them just say there's no way I work. So anyway, so that is the option if we go flex blended. Again, I don't think it's going to go there based on what has come out recently. So here's my in progress, and this list just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is my last slide aside from resources. Sorry if I'm going over on time, Mary Catherine. You can yell at me if you need to. So like I said, I typed this before TEA put their guidelines out today. If you have not, or yesterday, if you have not read it, they have some really good framework for what to do with exposures. So I need to write a policy on if I have a student exposed, if I have a student confirmed positive, if I have a staff member exposed, if I have a staff member confirmed positive. I've got to work out my after school care logistics and whether or not I can even continue to have that program. A decreased enrollment response. I'll be candid with everybody. We lost 5 kids in 3 days when everybody came back. They're for varying reasons, typically because we have medically fragile children in the household. And I am anticipating getting the question of, I see that you're offering distance learning. Why would I pay you if you're offering distance learning if I can get distance learning for free from public school? And we just stand on the fact that our product is different. Our product is proven. And, do they want to be at Calvary or not? And then key fundraiser cancellation response. So that is critical. I have a group working on transitioning all of my live and silent auction items from my fundraiser that didn't happen in April to a fully online platform. We found out yesterday that eBay does not charge for using their service for a nonprofit auction. I don't know much about it, so don't quote me on that. But if you're looking at those options, eBay is, all you end up paying is the PayPal fees, and I've negotiated PayPal for nonprofits, so it's a little bit cheaper. So if that's something you have to do. We also did not have a golf tournament in May that we have every year. We probably won't be able to have our fall festival. So my PTA and my fundraising gurus are working on what are these things going to look like? Believe it or not, in the grand scheme of things, I had some parents who donated some items to our silent auction who were very concerned about what was happening to those items. And we're talking like a $50 gift card. But they wanted to make sure that what they had given to the school was going to be auctioned off. And finally, what are we going to do in the rapid increase in cases? I know those of you in Harris County, they've got the dial, the ticker. And so it's what is going to happen if we get to orange and red. Travis County doesn't have that. And so I'm going to work with the healthcare group on what what are my metrics for deciding to go one way or another? At what point do I say, okay, we need to go to a different model because what we're doing based on the number of cases is not safe. CARES Act funds. So I've been working extensively with our local school district on CARES Act funds. I will very happily help any of you guys navigate that process. I know there's a lot of reading and there's a lot of very long documents. I'm pretty well versed in how it works, as well as accessing title funds, just based on my time in administration at public schools. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free to email me. And then finally, the last thing is the PPE pickup from TEA. I don't know if anybody has gone to the regional service centers and picked those up yet, but Region 13 isn't answering the phone. So I've got to go knock on their door and talk to them, because now that kids are going to be in masks, that is going to be very beneficial that we have access to those things. And finally, here are the resources. So the American Academy of Pediatrics guidance, which should put some parents' minds at ease regarding returning to school. The Healthcare Advisory Collaborative, their contact information, and I cannot sing their praises enough. I mean, they reply to my emails within half an hour. They are answering questions, and I mean, it's stupid questions is, hey, can I have soccer balls on campus? I mean, they will respond to them and not make me feel like a goofy person. The list of disinfectants. Again, I never knew that my Sterafine would not have been on the list of COVID-proof disinfectants. Rosner model, that is your social distancing student spacing. Obviously the SAES resource page, and then finally the TEA guidance for schools that they put out yesterday.
Catherine, we do have, thank you so much. That was great and very comprehensive, and we will have this available to you, to all of our participants, but we do have some questions that I would like to get to, and then we're going to throw it to Amy.
Okay.
So one of the quick questions they had is, where did you find the see-through masks?
So we are members of Staples Advantage, because we don't have an Office Depot nearby, and they had them. So you order them in packs of 10, and they're about $3 a piece. I can even go get one if y'all want to see it. Okay.
Did you, have you explored other virtual platforms other than Zoom? We heard about at the Early Learning Conference, we heard about Seesaw, we've heard about Google Classroom, RazKids. Have you explored others, or are you just using Zoom?
No, so we're purchasing RazKids for next year. I have some of my teachers that like that. Google Classroom was fantastic for my 3rd grade and up crowd in the spring distance learning. My 3rd grade teacher has 2 children at home, and so she would stay up after taking care of her own kids and videotape her teaching, and she did everything through Google Classroom. Seesaw is great for the younger crowd, and I am purchasing that for my pre-K and kinder teachers to use. I just totally drew a blank. Seesaw, Google Classroom. We utilized IXL extensively. And that is just it's very straightforward. It's pre-K through 12th grade, kind of just skills practice. It's skills practice, specifically math and reading, but teachers can generate reports. They can have recommended modules that their kids do. I was able to give my 5-year-old a tablet while I was working and say, do all of the modules with stars on them, and she could navigate it by herself. So it's been extremely helpful. Clever. If you guys have not looked into Clever for Education, so what that is it is a platform that essentially takes all of your apps that you're using for your students and all of your websites, and it houses them. So your student can log into their Clever platform and have all of the different apps that even just look like little square icons that are already logged in for them. Because one of the biggest hurdles for our parents was, they're logging into our HMH reading program, they're logging into Vocabulary Spelling City, they're logging into RazKids, they're logging into 15 different things with 15 different passwords, and eventually they just got angry. And so having Clever keep all that in one comprehensive spot for them will be very, very helpful. I utilized it as a public school teacher a long time ago when it first came out, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, I think what we've learned is that, depending on the school, everybody's going to find their own kind of stuff, and that is always a problem. So I'm going to hold off on the other questions, Catherine, until the end, because I'd like to have you stop sharing your screen for just a minute, and we're going to throw it over to Amy. So folks, what we asked Amy and Catherine both to do is to talk about the different areas that they're doing in each of their schools. And as you know, Amy's at St. Francis, which is a much larger school. And so her perspective is going to be interesting as well, because they have little bitties all the way up to 8th grade. So Amy, take it away.
Hi, good to see everybody today, and always happy to work with SAES. And I will tell y'all just from the get-go, just being a part of the association is a value-added piece of what we do, because you're never going to have to feel alone or not understand what everybody else is going through. And I've told people that this I'm coming up on my 40th year as an educator, and this was the hardest year ever. So if it makes you feel any better, if you're a new school administrator, everybody else, even if you're seasoned like me, this has been the hardest year. So give yourself a break on that. I've never encountered anything that I couldn't pick up a phone and call a colleague and say, "You've been through this before, tell me." But this is the first one. So we really are all in this together. So I'll just tell you that we have worked since last March on trying to navigate what none of us really understand how to do, but we had each other. So that's where I guess I will start. One of the things that is just that value added piece of being part of our schools is our community. And we felt really strongly that that was something that we needed to pay special attention to, and trying to preserve as much of what people came to love in our communities, with not just our program, but chapel and what does our parent involvement piece look like going forward, because so much is going to be different. So I will tell you that the events that we do is a really big part of our school, like it is for everyone else's. And so we tried to look at everything that we had within our community on the calendar for this coming year, and really with an eye of creativity and flexibility, and again, going back to what is really valued the most by our parents, trying to figure out how we could continue to do some of this. So I'm going to share my screen for just a minute, and this is just this is going to be a very busy looking screen. So let's see. Okay, you should be able to see that. So we asked each division to go through every event that we have on the calendar and see how we could adapt it possibly. So this is just one of the ways that we did this. You certainly could do anything you wanted. So starting out with just our very beginning of the year, we do a family chapel for all of our new families that are coming in. And so that's an opportunity for our chaplain to talk through, what does it look like to be part of an Episcopal school? What do we do in chapel? And this is every division that this happens. And so we talked about how we, since we are not going to be gathering large groups, how can we do that and still have some value in the chapel services? So just starting out with that very first program, we're altering. And that's what I've done here. Is that every grade was telling us whether or not we were canceling something, if we're off campus, rescheduling it, maybe postponing it till the second semester if things are better then, altering it, or then just no change. Some of them did not require a change. And along with that, we also asked what the communication would need to be. Are we communicating these changes or just anything about the event internally? Externally, who needs to know about this? And then what I think is probably the most important thing is, who is the faculty or staff point person? We have so many events in our school, and I think a lot of times we do things by committee, and we're all involved in something, but we don't ever really have one person that is the go-to person that either makes the final decision on how something is going to go or has all the answers. And so we found that that's really helpful if we have a point person. So in this case, with the new family chaplain, or the new family chapel, it's our chaplains. They would be the ones that would organize that event and carry that out. Other things like we do Meet the Teacher. I mean, that's going to look completely different, as you can imagine. We're looking now at Meet the Teacher as being a time that we probably will do a sign-up genius. And we'll have a scheduled time for a parent to come with their one child. They will spend 15 minutes. We'll have some kind of an interim time there that if we do need to clean up some surfaces, we can do that, and then the next person comes in. But we do feel like for the beginning of school, as we're planning to go back in some capacity, it's going to be really important for the child especially to meet the teacher. Last year, when we all left in March, we at least had the advantage of having had relationships built with children and families. That's going to be really different this year, and that may be really hard for us to do distance learning, especially for the very youngest children who they're just not going to have any knowledge of the teacher that they're going to be with. So that's going to be a different event. We know that. Those are things that we're already scheduling. We know that the first of school is not going to be large group gatherings. Welcome to the DEN conferences. For us, that is a one-on-one parent and teacher time to talk. That's really the parent's time to say, my child doesn't eat very well, so don't be surprised by that. Or if it's an older child, it may be, you know, they really take a long time to warm up at the beginning of the year. This is just their learning style. That will all be done virtually. And primarily we used Zoom as our platform last year. Our faculty meetings, we used Teams, which is the Microsoft piece, and our middle and upper school, we go through 11th grade this coming year. So they all used Google Documents and Google Drive. So the Google Classroom piece was helpful for them. So again, everything had to have some kind of, we had to address everything in some fashion. Students taking pictures. I mean, even simple things like that. They will take individual pictures, but we usually do the class pictures at the same time. We won't do that until maybe spring, or maybe we don't get to do that. So again, everything with our events has been really, that's been really a challenge, I think.
Amy, real quick, I told, we've had a couple of people ask about this spreadsheet, which I told you they would do because it's incredible. Sure. We're going to share like an example of it. You'd have to make it yourself, but we are going to share a picture of it so you can see what the columns are. I think kind of to your point about y'all's perspective has really been around ensuring that everything, your community events and things, nothing gets fallen by the wayside. And I think this spreadsheet will be really helpful. So we will share that with the group.
And you know, again, this may change, and we've told people, you know, there's going to be a lot of flexibility that's going to be necessary as we try to move forward, not knowing what the school model is going to look like necessarily next year. But part of the reason for this too is that, you know, so much of what we do in events and all of our planning is emotional. And so when you get to Grandparents' Day, you're not making a decision that week about not being able to bring the most vulnerable population onto campus, right? So we have Grandparents' Day at 2 different times of the year, depending on the division. Most of the divisions are around November, and the other is in February. Those are probably likely to be canceled on both ends, but it could be that we are doing some kind of either streaming a grandparent into their grandchild's their class at that time, so that they can at least get a little a bird's eye view of what happens during the day. Or is it them reading a story to their grandparent? We're going to just have to be really creative and think about things differently, because we don't want to take away all those things that, again, are really valuable. And that's really why families are with us, because, again, like Catherine said earlier, people could say, well, why am I paying for this? You know, I could actually go to the public school and get distance learning. We've had a similar enrollment challenge, I guess, especially with our youngest learners, because it is the physical care certainly that families need, not just the academic piece that they're looking for when you're talking about really young children. But strangely, we've also enrolled more students into our upper school, which is only 3 years old. And that's because families did not necessarily have a good experience in their public school. So, so people have seen that there's really been some advantages to being part of even in a distance learning model. So, okay, I'll stop sharing for a second, and we'll kind of post some information there. One of the other things that they wanted me to talk about certainly was, you know, again, social distancing. What does that look like for us? That's a hard one. And again, especially for the really young children and just us as people, it's hard for us as adults. I mean, we've all worked all summer, and it's hard for us to remember when we go into a room with other people to have to not get too close to them. I mean, we're pretty good about the mask, but not getting too close to anyone. We too will have lunch in classrooms this year. we have arranged it so that once a week, each grade level will be able to come down to our dining room and have a hot lunch, which is what they've been used to. So that's still one of the things that we would like for them to be able to have a little bit of a tradition, I guess. And we've looked at chapel in similar ways. It's going to be streamed to classrooms, but once a week, a group will be able to go to our Fine Arts Center, and that's where we will hold chapel rather than in the church, and be able to have that actually in-person service with our chaplains. So again, we're just trying to be creative and think of ways that we can hold on to some of the things that are really valuable to our children as well. We'll have a cohort model for our primary school, which is our early childhood division, lower school and middle school. It's going to be really hard, especially for the older children. The upper school is going to, they will change classes, but in every other division, the teachers are going to move around. The middle school students are not going to be real happy about it, but again, we have a big division, and it's really hard for us to imagine transitioning in halls and not being a little reckless about that. When we start out school in our in-service this year, we will have social distancing in the biggest place that we can find, which is our Fine Arts Center for faculty, and hopefully have them on campus for meeting time. But they too are going to have masks on. We're going to ask students even in our lower grades to all wear masks. And our rationale is that we're thinking that we need to start out as restrictive as we need to be, and then we can always lighten up some. It's going to be harder to later say, now you have to wear a mask. So that's really been our approach to this. And just, it's going to be different. It's going to look different. We think most people understand that, even though they want what we used to look like, and hopefully we can get to that at some point. No guest on campus, the same thing. That's going to be really hard in our community. We have one of the really fun pieces that we do is something that's called Art a la carte, and it's a group of parents who have they've trained to do some art education pieces. They come into classrooms, and at all levels within lower and middle school, they do some art history, an art history program. Well, they're not going to be able to do that, but they are going to do it virtually. So they're even learning about how to do this. And we really, I know you all found this, is that people really came to appreciate the work that we do after they saw how hard it was working with children at home. So I think that's been one thing that's good that's come out of this. That cohort model has a little bit of a twist. We've kind of come up with a cohort within a cohort. In our first and second grade classes, in kindergarten as well, they do some team teaching. Typically, they pull some students and share some students for some reading and math differentiation. And so instead of having 4 sections of kindergarten, or in this year's case, it's 5, sharing children for some of that time, teachers are going to work in pairs. And so that it's not as small as their regular cohort class, but we're going to use those shields, those plastic, I don't know, they're like a fold-up shield that will be available for students and teachers to be able to work behind, so that they can see it. It's really hard to teach reading, right, without being able to see what someone's mouth looks like. And so, and the same thing, we've got the see-through mask that it just has like a clear window around your face. So that's kind of what we're looking at. When we come back for in-service, also with social distancing, one of the things on our agenda is to take small groups of teachers and staff on a tour of the school. And we'll talk about, this stairwell is only going down this year. This one only goes up. Of course, all that goes out in an emergency, but this is the side of the hall that we're using. So everybody goes in here. If you're about to meet someone, then you dip into this little space and you let them pass. I mean, it's going to be really restricted at first, but again, we can lighten up some later. But our students move around a lot in middle school. Again, that was our reason for not letting them do that at this point. It
Amy,
does
will you
change
do
up
that?
some of the. Go ahead.
Okay, Amy, sorry to interrupt. A couple of questions. I have one question that I want to get to. Will y'all do that with your students too? Like doing the traveling and giving the tours and talking to them about facilities, so how they can manage that? Yeah, and again, that's primarily why we're going to do that first with teachers, so that they have the rules, if you will, about how we're going to do that. Our nurses that are going to teach. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say our nurses on each campus are going to actually do, hand washing instruction for faculty and for children after the students are back. So, and there will be scheduled hand washing times during the day at every division. So,
Great.
trying
Okay,
to
so
do
I do have
everything
a
we can.
question for that I'd like to get to for both of you. Amy, you can start first. The question is about communicating with families about the plans. And I've heard this several times about people being kind of hesitant to share too much because it can change. And how do
Sure.
you plan on delivering the plan to the families before the start of school? So Amy, if you'll touch on that, and then Catherine, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I will tell you that we have spent so much time on that this summer. We actually have our piece that's going to production today. We just literally got it finished. And it was the hardest thing just to kind of, lock it up and say it's done, because things have changed every day and we've seen that happen. So we have the disclaimers that you can imagine that says, all of these are subject to change. We're going to be flexible. When we started out last spring in quarantine, when we were going to distance learning, we said we had two major goals. And the first was continuity of learning, and the second one was maintaining our community connection. And so that's been really important to us. So we've kept that even with starting this year, whether or not that's going to be distance learning, a hybrid model, which we also have a plan for, or just completely at home, and what the on-site version is going to look like. No field trips. I mean, we're really kind of spelling that out to people. And, we don't know what the athletics is going to look like. If you've got older students, that's a big deal.
So you're going to
here.
send that out pretty soon? Is
Yeah,
that what you're
that's gonna
saying? Is that the
It's going to be an electronic version. And so
okay.
it will give parents pretty much everything that, we will be taking temperatures in their car every day. We'll have people that are responsible in carpool. That's like one of the places you stop and you get, the little laser temperature every morning. So before you get out of the car, we're not letting you in if you have a fever. We know we'll get pushback on some things, that's just a regular fever. It's not COVID, and it could be, but again, we're going to be as restrictive as we need to be to begin with. But all of that's going to be spelled out in this piece with an explanation of these are the three things that we're looking at. We've got on-site learning, we've got blended hybrid learning, and we've got at-home distance learning that would be just complete. And all that's going to be based on whatever the conditions are, either in the school community, because it could be different. And we have two campuses. One campus may be fine and the other not. So we won't necessarily say all of school is closed unless that was a mandate by the governor. So we'll kind of look at all those considerations.
Okay, so what I heard from Amy is that that's going to probably go out pretty soon. Catherine,
Yep.
Are you guys going to start communicating that pretty soon?
So I sent the initial email with the plan and the flow chart, I believe on June 15th. With the flow chart that David had shared with us, a similar version of that. And in that communication to parents, I outlined what we would do in person wise, what a flex blended looks like, and then obviously that distance learning would be an option as well. And I included the disclaimer of, this is all subject to change based on whatever information comes out. So then about 2 weeks ago, I had my board send an email out to parents addressing specifically that we are not changing our supply fee. We are not changing our tuition rates. It was way more eloquent than that, but that's, I'm a little to the point. But so with that information, just explaining that, there will be a financial hardship for the school. We are prepared to absorb that cost. We want you here. Like, this is where we are. And then I sent an update 2 days ago with saying similar things. And I use the verbiage, our plan is to reopen at the maximum capacity that is still safe for our school community. So, because, all of us are getting the same questions, getting phone calls saying that we're a private school, we need to take a stand, we don't have to do this, we can go back, or then you have the flip side of that coin. So I communicated that, and I linked that the HAC podcast for parents to educate themselves. I linked the American Academy of Pediatrics. I linked the TEA draft version of the reopening guidelines. And then I also forwarded the TEA draft version yesterday when it came out, because one of the biggest things is, due to lack of information, parents especially, or everybody's going to latch onto snippets of information and take that as the truth. And so living in a world where people get all of their information from social media and or group texts, just sending out the factual information as it comes has been important. So they're getting about an email from me every week or two right now. I did run into a situation where a rumor got started that I was completely changing the plan for the fall, wasn't being transparent, and I wasn't telling them anything. And I mean, like Mary Catherine, you've spent a lot of time with me. You know that I'm anything but transparent. So, or if not transparent, I should say.
Right.
So, there was that. And then,
Well, I think this is something we've been hearing over and over again about the communication issue. And I think what I'm hearing from both of you is more transparency and more communication versus less. And I
Yes.
think, the question was, I'm hesitant. What if it changes? I hear that, but I don't know if David wants to speak to this, but I think it's more likely that people will misinterpret if you're silent than if you're overly communicative.
Well, 100%. I mean, I think the reality is you've got to communicate everything with a caveat. This is where we are right now, and depending on what happens, things are going to change. What you don't want to fall into is not communicating at all out of fear of potential changes.
Right.
Because if there's a vacuum, someone else will control the narrative, and it may or may not be the narrative you would choose.
Well, and I think the narrative oftentimes is they don't know what they're doing, so they're saying nothing. When in reality, we all know that we're working really hard to make these plans, but if we're not communicating that, that leaves that, as David said, that vacuum for people to be talking about what isn't happening. So I think that's really important, and I appreciate that. I've got a couple of other questions that I'd like to get to, if I could. Y'all mentioned about student temps, and so there were a couple of things on the latest TEA guidance suggests not to do student temperatures daily. I don't know what that is.
I have that. Hang on.
That's
So the
thrown out there.
reference is the latest TEA guidelines talk about staff taking temperatures by themselves, self-monitoring, students self-monitoring, that you're not required to do on-campus temperature checks of kids. However, nothing in these guidelines prohibit it.
Okay.
So I think the question is anyone following that and not doing it? And I'm sure there will be. I haven't heard, I can't say, for sure how many are going to take student temps and how many are not. It sounds like, Catherine, you are.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yes.
Amy, are you taking student temps?
Yeah, we are, because again, am I muted? Okay.
No, you're good.
We kind of, again, we feel like, again, we think people are going to feel safer coming back.
Right.
I mean, if you go to get your hair cut, they're checking your temperature, and so there's probably nobody that's going to work closer or be more with a child than a teacher. So we just think it's really important that they see that we're really being careful. We're not going to have any vendors on campus and in the building unless they have their temperature taken. So it's the rule for everybody right now.
And I may post a question on the discussion board to see if we do have any schools that are going the other direction. Most of the schools I've heard, at least since last evening, I haven't talked to a ton of schools since those guidelines came out. Most schools are taking temperatures, from what I can tell.
Well, and I would be willing. Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
So, two perspectives. One, I have a child in daycare right now, and we walk up, they boop, okay, you're good, go in. It is simple. It's not a big deal. There was one day that he had turned off his little rear AC vent, and he was like 98.8, and I felt like I was in Monsters Inc. when it was like 2319, 2319. So like there is some degree of delicacy that staff members need to keep in mind if a temp is high. And I know we're not subject to FERPA guidelines, but it's just good practice not to, yell out people's personal business. So I know there was a question in there about someone hearing that if you take one person's temperature in the car, you have to take everybody. I haven't heard that. And I did run it by the HAC that I would be taking temperatures at the car rider line. And they said, great. So to answer that question for clarification.
Okay, so we also had a question, and I think this is really for Amy, about the restroom trips being handled with one-way hallways. So, how are y'all? I guess that will be when you communicate with your kids about how you're handling that?
Yeah, and there's flexibility in everything. We don't want someone to have to do this big round trip if there's an emergency. The same thing is true if someone is sick. We're not going to make them go in and out a door. There's going to be some common sense that we hope people will practice, and give kids permission to not do some things if it's really necessary. But same thing with the bathroom. There'll be scheduled times for them to go, but so that we don't have every middle school student trying to go at the same time. We've even talked about the old school bathroom pass, just so that you can kind of know if there's, do you put a hook on the outside and you put your pass there so someone knows that there's already 2 people in there, or just all of those details that might make a difference. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to put into the chat, Amy, and to everybody so that y'all have these emails. I want to make sure that you guys have, if y'all have additional questions. There were some questions that we have about with Catherine, with HAC, how they charge, how you collaborated with them. I'm going to let people email you about that privately. And anything that we've talked about today, we're trying to get that information in the chats to be sure that like if there's something that y'all are putting out that somebody would like a copy of, we're going to send that out. Send your email to the chat so that people can email you privately about that. And there was a question about how you're going to spend the CARES Act funds, and that's an anonymous attendee. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to email Catherine or call her about the CARES stuff, because there's a lot of information she has on that she's done a lot of that. David, anything else?
No, I see Amy's. I'll kind of thank everyone for attending. And Amy, I see Amy's email, but I don't see Catherine.
I'm going to put Catherine's in right now.
That in. Well, I'm thanking everybody for attending. Again, the websites that have been referenced, all those will be in the either the documents that you can find in the document library, or if you want to watch a recording, you can see it that way. But all those websites that have been referenced will be on the reference sheet. Thank you to Catherine and to Amy
very
for
much
taking time for sharing your work. All the good math teachers know it's important to share your work. So, share your work. Thank you so much for demonstrating all of the work that you have done, all the resources that you've pulled together. We're hopeful that this will help all of our schools as they're trying to navigate these same types of questions. Just one reminder, we're back tomorrow at 10 a.m. The same topic, but we're going to drill down specifically for what this looks like for early learning programs. So the registration link for that session is in the chat, or you can go to our website under events and webinars. You can find the registration for that as well. But thank you so much to Amy and to Catherine. Mary Catherine, as always, thank you. And don't hesitate to reach out if we can be of assistance. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.